Welcome back to the channel. You are listening to Sheroy's Voice, and this is the One Mic Podcast, episode 6. What a weekend. After a 2-2 draw at the Etihad Stadium, and just calling it a 2-2 draw does not do it justice. Look, before I get into analysing the game, what it means, a lot of the noise coming out after the game, you guys know I like to begin these videos in an ever so slightly soppy fashion, but I have to say thank you. You might notice that on this video now, there are ads. There is the option to give us super thanks in the comments if you want. And that is because through your support, through the amount that you've engaged, through the amount of people that have subscribed, through the length of time that you've watched these videos, I am now officially a YouTube partner. So thank you all. It means the world. But perhaps most importantly, thank you, Mikel Arteta, and thank you to this Arsenal team for a performance that ultimately for me, even though it wasn't a win, really does mark a sense of evolution within the team. And I say that because it wasn't that long ago. I think it would have been maybe 2021. Granit Xhaka got sent off at the Etihad. I think we lost that game 5-0. Now, look at the way in which we can leave the Etihad after a red card. And if there's any sort of testament as to how much this team has evolved. When I used to see the fixtures at the beginning of the season, I used to look at games like the Etihad. When that day would arrive, the first of the two, no matter what the result, I would breathe a sigh of relief and I'd go, oh, thank God, we don't have to play them again for a few months. When that full-time whistle went yesterday, I wanted it again immediately. I genuinely wish the return fixture was on Wednesday instead of this Bolton game, because I so desperately want to get a victory over this team, and I so desperately believe that we can do it. Let's look at the first 5 games of the league season in context, okay? Bearing in mind that when the fixtures came out, or when the league started, I didn't know that Martin Odegaard was going to be injured. I didn't know that Calafiori was going to be a fitness concern. I didn't know that Marino was going to be out for as long as he was. I didn't know that Thomas Partey was going to have played 2 full 90s on international break, for example. There were so many things that I didn't know. And even then, when I looked at the first 5, I sat there and in my head thinking that we would have a full strength team, said that 11 points out of an available 15 would be a bloody good return. Would be a bloody good return when you're talking about Aston Villa away, when you're talking about Tottenham away, when you're talking about City at the Etihad, when you're talking about even the home games, being a team like Brighton, an expansive team with a new manager, somewhat unknown quantity. I thought that 11 out of an available 15 would have been a fantastic return. Now, you take those results, in addition to all of the injuries that I've mentioned, you look at the only 2 games that we dropped points in being the games that we were down to 10 men in. I really don't understand what anyone is complaining about. And to further contextualize it, those comments made by Rodri at the end of last season as to the Arsenal mentality, not turning up to play football, not really wanting to win, no real endeavor to score, that was in the back of my mind. And I'm sure that it was in the, well, maybe not even the back, it's probably in the forefront of the players' minds and the managers' minds, all right? And even with all of that taken into account, this is me included, mainstream pundits, YouTube pundits, fans that I spoke to, I honestly don't know anyone that predicted a win before this game. I do not know anyone that predicted a win, and a lot of people who predicted draws, I think predicted draws slightly optimistically and thought that we might lose. But notwithstanding the fact that we had 10 men, we came out with a point. Let's get into the substance of the game. So the lineup, I didn't actually know that it was because Ben White had a fitness concern, that he was dropped when I saw that. When I saw that, my mind instantly went to, well, White's had a lot of minutes. And if you are looking at the Tottenham game, I know that he was the only one who was up against a world-class player in his position in Son, but he did struggle ever so slightly there. So I thought this might have been a tactical change, but it transpires that it wasn't. And it was yet another early fitness concern, and we brought in Calafiori. But those are my only thoughts with the lineup. I was surprised to see that it was in fact Partey and Rice. I thought it might have been Jorginho and Rice in a far more defensive setup than we eventually saw. But credit to Mikel Arteta and the boys, because Partey was there purely for what he ended up doing. Absolutely incredible ball progression and absolutely incredible off-the-ball work in that first half. Of course, his performance had to change, as did everyone's in the second half. We do go 1-0 down. And a few people have sort of sought to focus on Calafiori getting done by Savinho. Look, ultimately, no matter how good you are as a defender, sometimes someone with the talent of Savinho can do that, but there is still a fair bit of work to be done before they score. You might be able to look at the centre backs in terms of the amount of space that Erling Haaland had, but even then, it was a fantastic finish. It was a very, very clever, inventive finish from someone who ultimately just knows how to put the ball in the back of the net, right? Now at 1-0, I was watching the game with my brother, and I sat there, I looked at him and I said, look, I know that everyone who's watching this now is fearing the worst, but I really hope that these boys aren't, because 1-0 at the Etihad, it's not determinative. They've conceded goals against far lesser teams in recent weeks, and I firmly believe that we had a goal in us. The goal that we got initially, all right, people will describe it as a wonder strike, which it absolutely was. But that goal stems from bravery and possession from Martinelli to beat his man and ultimately get the ball to Calafiori. And he was doing that over and over and over again. And I think even though there were times that Kyle Walker did get the ball off Martinelli, I think all in all, in the first half anyway, when Martinelli wasn't solely tasked with defensive work, I thought that was a massive, massive improvement from Martinelli, and credit to him. Hopefully this is the first of many where he can kick on and have some genuine attacking end product. The reason I'm not going overboard with it is, look, I know it's one of those assists that isn't really an assist because Calafiori has a lot of work to do. And also in the second half, you can't really judge anyone's attacking performance in the second half because of the job that we were ultimately asked to do. Let's talk about the bravery on the ball. You're looking at the bravery from Calafiori to take the shot, but it does show some real mentality and bravery to go behind at the Etihad and be in the lead by halftime. Not just say, right, we're back in it, let's see it through to halftime, for example. And also the bravery and the way in which we can execute. If you remember, before Gabriel scores that corner, there's an almost identical one before that he probably should have put away when Doku was marking him. And it sparked what looked like it was meant to be a tactical change, with Kyle Walker then marking him. But again, bravery, conviction, saying, okay, fine, you can change your personnel, but I'm Bukayo Saka and I'm still good enough to deliver exactly the same ball that I did before. And I'm Gabriel, and it doesn't matter who you put in front of me, I'm still good enough to beat that man and make up for the miss. And he scores, right? That for me was, I celebrated at that moment because having seen the way in which we've evolved over recent years, I probably over-celebrated in that moment actually, but having seen the way in which we've evolved, I look back at the 0-0, and even though we did create that chance at the end last year, that there weren't many moments in the game where I thought we were going to take it and we were good value. Even when we beat them at the Emirates, it was a very, very late deflected goal. We didn't create much in that game. It was a bit of a smash and grab. But there was just something once we equalised here where I thought, no, we're going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead. It seemed like the pendulum swung somewhat in our minds. Maybe we took the comments to heart as to how adventurous or the sort of lack of adventurous football that we played previously. But it showed. It absolutely showed. And it is such testament to the work that we've done on set pieces that now we can show you our hand, you can try and make a change, and you still can't stop it, and we're still going to score the goal that we want to score. When you can see even the game against Tottenham, where you can see Tottenham fans standing there back when we take a corner, the level of expectation when we have set pieces now, it's not quite that of a penalty for obvious reasons, but there is almost an inevitability of this is going to go in from opposition fans, and there's an air of excitement amongst Arsenal fans. And I can't quite remember seeing anything like it in my adult life as a football fan. This is some of the best set piece work I've seen as an adult. And the notion that we're saying that for Arsenal Football Club, having seen how poor we were traditionally, not just at scoring set pieces, but at defending from set pieces, I was genuinely lost for words at that point. So I'm on cloud nine. Everything's going well. I'm talking to my brother about what the halftime team talk is going to be. Is it going to be more of the same, or do you think that we're going to come out and try and protect that lead? And the game changes completely. The game changes irreversibly, and the game changes irreparably with a refereeing decision. I'm going to talk about the refereeing decision. For anyone that says Leandro Trossard should have known better and you need to be walking a tightrope, and even if there is only a second in it, you have to be so careful now, having seen what happened to Declan Rice previously. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you, but ultimately, I'm not actually going to talk about consistency and decision-making either, because everyone online is saying it, and I don't need to rehash what's been said. But there is a problem with this rule. There is a problem with this rule, and the reasons that it's been implemented are actually inconsistent with other rule changes and the rationale behind them for this season. And I'll take you through that. But when you're looking at the harshest punishments in the criminal justice system, for example, you have offences such as possession of Class A drugs, which carry a relatively severe sentence, but you get the most severe sentence when it's possession with intent to supply. Over here, you're talking about a second yellow where you're getting the most severe punishment, ultimately leading to a red card. This rule is being applied with such rigidity, maybe because of the way in which the rule itself is drafted, that you ought to be absolutely certain as to whether there is intent, in my view. But that clearly isn't the way in which the rule is drafted, and that's not how it's implemented, because no one can look at me and be deadly serious and be absolutely convinced that Trossard 100% had the intent of delaying the restart when you're looking at the prevailing circumstances in the game, when you're looking at the stage of the game, when you're looking at how close to the halfway line that was, when you're looking at the glance to Martinelli, for example. All of those things taken into account, and the short amount of time. They need to address that, and they need to address that quickly. And what I was saying about taking you through the rules, bear with me, I just want to open this up. You guys will inevitably remember all of the rule changes as to handballs, right? And we saw so many penalties given to the extent that defenders couldn't even defend. You didn't know whether you had to have your arms behind your back at all times when you were in the box. You didn't know whether it was anything to do with proximity. You didn't know whether it had to be deliberate. You didn't know whether there was an unnatural position involved. It became so unclear that at the beginning of this season, this is what the Premier League said, and this was their public statement, all right, for that rule change. The handball law will be relaxed. Players have been told by the Premier League they do not have to move with their arms rigidly by their sides or behind their backs. The position of their arm or hand will be judged in relation to the movement of their body. Howard Webb said, "We get a sense that we give too many handballs for actions that are quite normal and justifiable. The guidance to officials this season is that less is more. You will see fewer harsh handball penalties." We give too many for actions that are quite normal and justifiable. Officials have been told that less is more because it was too harsh. Ring any bells? Does that ring any bells when you've seen 2 red cards for Arsenal in the last 5 games for things that ultimately were innocuous and no one was complaining about before? I put my house on it that this rule will be changed. Before the end of the season, maybe not, because we all know how hard-headed those that make the rules are. But this rule will be changed, and ultimately, you can talk about whether we would have won both of those games had we had 11 on the pitch, but it doesn't change the fact that in both of those games, we were in the lead with 11 on the pitch. So if you're looking at a win percentage calculator, I think it would have shown that we probably would have won. And if you're asking me what I believe, obviously it's just speculation, but I think we would have won. And the real sort of indictment of all of this, go to Arteta's presser after the game. At the end of the press conference, he said, "You guys haven't asked me a single tactical question in ultimately a clash at the Etihad of the best 2 teams in the country. And we're not talking about the football in the way in which we should be. And I was forced to play a game that nobody wanted to play, that I did not want to play, and that nobody wanted to watch. And therein lies the problem." He says himself, he goes, "Throughout the course of the season, if the rules stay as they are, You are going to see many teams down to 10, even 9, and I agree with him if they do apply the rules across the board. And I tried to make that not ranty and keep it grounded in sort of evidence ultimately, and analysing what the referees have said and what their thought process has been elsewhere. So I apologise if it does come across a little bit ranty. But that is ultimately where I stand with things. And now that I've got that off my chest, let me move into the second half. I have never seen a defensive performance like it. For that entire half, it looked like it was an attack against defense training session with people moving as though they were on strings, moving as a unit, moving as if it was second nature, moving as if it was muscle memory, moving as if it was all they knew, all they did. And bear in mind, players like Thomas Partey had fantastic attacking performances in the first half, then had to do some of the most incredibly disciplined off the ball work. If you noticed how Thomas Partey knew exactly when to come out and close someone off or close someone out at the edge of the box and shut down an angle and then drop back in. It was formulaic. It was absolutely formulaic. Martinelli, one of the reasons I think he stayed on, difficult to call between the two, but for me, he is the best defensive winger that we have at the club. And he's one of the best defensive wingers that I think you're going to see in this league. It is not to be understated, the amount of defensive work that he does all the time, but these were particularly extenuating circumstances up against the most prolific attack in the country for that long. David Raya doing what David Raya now does, keeping us in the game, doing the simple things brilliantly well, alleviating pressure. There came a point where, as that half progressed, I just sat there and went, we're not going to lose. They might get a goal, which is perfectly normal when you're up against a team of that caliber for that long, but we're not going to lose. And I felt the same against Tottenham, and I felt the same against Villa, and I felt the same against Atalanta. And I said as much in my AFTV fan cam after Tottenham. There is just something about this team. They now demonstrably cannot stomach the thought of losing, and they will leave absolutely everything on the pitch. For me, one of the performances that I think, looking back at the end of the season, I will probably be most proud of. If we don't get over the line this season, I was listening to the Gary Neville podcast at the end. The analysis that, is this a game that Arsenal will look back on and regret the fact that they couldn't see it out, skirts over the fact that we had absolutely no right to be ahead by the end of that match because of who we were up against and the task that awaited us. They're only analysing the match in the context of the last 30 seconds when they're coming to that conclusion. This will not be one of the games that I look back at and say, maybe we could have got more. This will be one of the games, right, that I look back at and say, all odds were against us. Nothing statistically at half-time after that red card would have said we had a chance in hell of winning that game. And we came out with a point. Fantastic. On to the next one. Undefeated after 5, 3 of the toughest away games there were. And this, sorry, I'm actually making myself angry whilst recording this. We're now being told how to play. We're now being told how to play, not just by Manchester City players, who I'm going to come on to, but by rival fans. I'm sorry, but one, who on earth are you to tell a team that has challenged for a title how to play football, but also, who on earth are you to tell us how to play football when we have already illustrated to you that we can do it all? We have shown you that we can grind out the tough 0-0 away at Atalanta. We can set up to absorb pressure and get the 1-0 from a set piece against Tottenham. We have shown you that we can level it up at the Etihad with a wonder strike and go ahead through a set piece. But we've also shown you in the entire second half of last season, we're a team that can score 3, 4, 5, and 6 against teams routinely for a sustained amount of time. We've also shown you that we're a team that can be devastating on the break. We're also a team that has shown you that when we want to, we can have 70% possession. We have shown you that we can do it all. We look at the opposition, we look at the players that we have available, we look at their strengths, we look at our weaknesses, we play the percentages, and we do what we need to do to get the result, because this is a results-based business. And I don't want to hear any more of this is an entertainment business and clashes like this ought to be entertaining. No one is going to praise us for being entertaining and losing a match. The double standards that I'm seeing with the analysis after this game, and the way in which Arsenal are being spoken about, it must be deliberately just disingenuous, because I can't say in good faith that there are that many people that ultimately, at the risk of sounding condescending, have such low intellect to analyze the game in such a rudimentary way and not appreciate the task that was at hand from halftime onwards. And this goes into the bit that I really wanted to discuss on this pod. A lot's been said about the rivalry between Arsenal and Manchester City. And we looked at it at the beginning of Arteta's tenure, where there was no rivalry. We were, complete lickleman to them. Arteta would talk about how big the gap was, how we had to get somewhat closer to them, but we'd routinely lose to them by more than 3 goals. They were already winning league titles. City traditionally would dispose of us and have actually disposed of lots of teams, including Liverpool, even when at the height of their rivalry, like traditionally cold, heartless, about their business mercenaries. And that was what I thought was one of their deadliest and most enviable qualities. Up until Sunday at the Etihad. You had Rodri in the first minute feigning injury to try and gain an advantage. You had Bernardo Silva after the game saying that we didn't come to win. We took the lead against you, having gone behind, and then had to do what we had to do for the second half. The fact that players were queuing up to have that discussion, the fact that Erling Haaland felt the need to speak to Miles Lewis-Skelly in the way that he did and say, well, who are you? I mean, I'm pretty sure he's 17 years old. I mean, what does it say about a man to have to be that condescending and derogatory to someone who ultimately wouldn't have finished sixth form if they still had to be in sixth form? What does it say about someone who will go up to a manager who's shown you and your team nothing but respect, and so remain humbler, be humbler, as if we haven't just displayed humility throughout last season and always praised the work that Manchester City have done and called them the best team in the world? I will always say this. I will always maintain this in every walk of life. When someone feels the need to be the loudest person in the room, that's when you know you've got them. That is when you know that you're doing something right. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with doing what Arteta did and doing what Gabriel Jesus did. Quietly reasoning with people or walking away. There's nothing wrong with doing what Gabriel did after the ball was thrown at the back of his head and just standing his ground in a cool, calm, collected manner and not being the visibly agitated person, not being the loudest in the room, because that, for me, is the first sign that cracks might be starting to appear. And I know I'm talking about treble winners. I know I'm talking about the team that has just done 4 in a row. I know I'm talking about a team that has won 6 of the last 7. But throughout that entire period, we started by being nowhere near them, but we're now really on the cusp. This now has instilled a level of confidence, not just with regard to the mentality, but also the capability of this team to do what's required, come what may, no matter what comes our way, in what I would describe as an unparalleled fashion. And to be honest, that level of sort of antagonization of the two teams, I'm telling you this now, it benefits Arsenal. You want to make it personal? Personal suits us just fine. Go back to the All or Nothing documentary. When Ivan Toney wanted to take shots, we put that tweet up on the big screen. Brentford didn't beat us after that. You want to talk about how we felt hard done by at Newcastle, and people came out and started ultimately belittling us for the way in which we reacted to that? Well, what did we do against Newcastle after that? What's happened to that rivalry? When teams make it personal against us, we use it as motivation. Against Manchester City, we didn't really need motivation because we knew that they were the ones that were standing in our way, standing in the way of what we wanted to achieve. But they've just added further fuel to that fire. And as I said at the outset of this, I cannot wait until the Emirates fixture. And people are looking at the Premier League and saying, okay, fine, you're 2 points behind Manchester City, but you have to extrapolate results and look at the fixtures that we've played compared to them. 2 points behind Manchester City, having already gone to the Etihad, having already gone to Aston Villa, having already gone to Tottenham, even though we're 2 points behind in the scheme of the season right now, and particularly with the sort of versatility and the mentality that we're showing, and perhaps taking into account the news that I've heard that Rodri is out for the season, I don't think it's out of this world to be saying, actually, it's advantage Arsenal. Actually, it's advantage Arsenal. And I don't mind putting this out there. I don't mind if it comes back and bites me in the arse at the end of the season, because that is genuinely how I feel at this moment in time. And if you can't articulate how you feel at this moment in time as a football fan, then when can you? That is not 2 points dropped. That is 1 point gained. And that is a good result. I'm not sitting here celebrating a draw necessarily in the context of the season. I'm not sitting here celebrating a draw because I think that all we ever need to do at the Etihad is get a point and move on. But I'm very happy with the draw because of the way in which that game could have panned out, and the fact that they had to rely upon a moment of luck, a deflection that falls at the feet of John Stones, and even then David Raya has tried with some of the most ridiculously acrobatic goalkeeping I've ever seen to lift his leg up, and it just shaves the outside of the leg and goes in. He could have even stopped that. But it is what it is. It is what it is. Whew. I need to breathe. On to the Carabao Cup. We had the North London derby away. We had the Champions League away. We had a potential title decider away. We now have 3 home games. The Carabao Cup is the first. We do have injury concerns and now another bloody suspension, to the extent that I don't think we can rotate the way in which I would have wanted to. And I say that because I'm not sure that Zinchenko is fit. I think this would have been a good game for him. Tomiyasu's not fit. I think this would have been a good game for him. I believe that Trossard is suspended for this. I think it would have been a good game for him. I think that because Bukayo Saka had to come off in the second half, he might be the experienced one that starts up front on the right-hand side. So maybe we don't rotate in the way that we would have wanted to. I think if Marino is fit, it would have been a fantastic opportunity for him too, if he wouldn't have already made his way into the starting 11. But it is what it is. Because after this game, we play again in the Premier League on a Saturday. We're back in the Champions League on a Tuesday against a relatively worthy adversary in PSG. I want to win this game. We've competed well on all fronts so far in all the competitions that we've played in. At this stage of the Carabao Cup, for me, it's not so much about the performance in terms of the team gelling, although I do think we now have a base level and a style that is almost not going to be interrupted, even with rotation. And I think we saw glimpses of that in the Champions League, and we've seen glimpses of that with the players that have had to step in the Premier League. But I am looking at Ethan Ranieri in this. I am looking at Lewis Skelly in this. I am looking at Raheem Sterling in this. You know, it's a fantastic opportunity, and absolutely no disrespect to a team like Bolton, but this is the sort of team that if you're a big name Premier League player, or even if you're not a big name Premier League player, but you're at a big Premier League club, this is the sort of game where you ought to show why you're at that club. And they should be relishing the opportunity to play in front of the home fans. And one of the most magnificent things about the Carabao Cup games is those tickets open up to certain sections of the fan base that are otherwise sort of precluded from getting tickets for Premier League games and Champions League games, because it's slightly easier to get Carabao tickets. So it's a fantastic opportunity for the fans too. And that's why I think the atmosphere will be great. I'm not entirely sure how the game's going to pan out. I can give you a score prediction for the sake of it. I'm going to go 2-0 because, as I said, I don't think we'll be the most fluid, but I think we do certainly have enough with players like Jorginho, who I think will start, and with our defensive setup to be able to keep a clean sheet. And then I will return with the One Mic podcast after our next Premier League game. And I am, in fact, I think, if all goes well, on AFTV this weekend for the Leicester match, which brings me on to the final segment of this show. You know, weekly is my favourite segment, but this week my favourite segment was actually just ranting about the Manchester City players and their reaction after that game, because I needed to get that off my chest. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. Last week's wrong answers only question was, what is Ange Postecoglou going to win this year? Now, even though this doesn't strictly go to the question, for anyone who's my age group, born in the 1990s, used to watch terrestrial TV, you might remember this soap. JW Francis 08 says, well, it's no Australian soap, but he'll definitely lose to Arsenal home and away. I thought that was genius. That was absolutely genius. But this week's winner for me. Oh, actually, I think there might be two. This was another one. I know I said I was only going to do winner and runner-up, but people are funny. Mayor Adam West 120. What's he gonna win? The old firm. Implying that he ain't gonna have a job and he's gonna have to go back to his old club. But this week's winner for me, because I actually thought the same, Habib Malik 6431, and is going to win the award for managing to hold a straight face whilst telling people that he always wins in his second season, knowing full well that he manages Tottenham Hotspur Football Club and that they are cursed. Habib, you are this week's winner. Now, The question for this week, I did want to poke fun at Manchester City. I wanted to poke fun at Kyle Walker for some of the most ridiculous set-piece defending that I've ever seen. I wanted to poke fun at John Stones for blowing kisses like he was being asked to do an encore at the Royal Albert Hall, having scored an equaliser. I wanted to make fun of Erling Haaland, who has scored, a hat-trick, 2 goals and 1, and has absolutely no reason to be throwing the ball at Gabriel's head. I wanted to do all of that, but I'm going to refrain. Going to be the bigger man. I know. We're getting some ridiculous red cards. This week's question for Wrong Answers Only. What is Arsenal's next red card going to be for? That is, what is Arsenal's next red card going to be for? As I said at the beginning, I did not think that I would ever become a YouTube partner and that this channel would be able to ultimately monetize. So I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I do this just because I enjoy speaking to you. I do this just because I like voicing my opinion, and I do this because I see all of the support in the comments. But the fact that you guys have engaged that much is such a bonus, and it honestly fills my heart with so much gratitude. I'm back again next week. This has been the One Mic Podcast, episode 6. You have been listening to Sheroy's voice. Until next time, people.